We have a question?
Jeff, has there been any precedent for this to happen in any other sport that you're aware of?
Absolutely. So USADA has informed me that they reached out to other professional sports organizations who have had the exact same issue. Because of collective bargaining issues, they don't want it to be public about it. But there's another professional sports league out there that's had this issue pop up multiple times, and they've handled their adjudication the same way that USADA handled Jon's, is that the individual is punished under strict liability, or the individuals under strict liability the first time through, and as long as the science showed still residual effect in subsequent tests, they were not punished again. It's really a matter of double jeopardy. Go ahead.
I think there's been a baseball player, Cody Stanley. Did you ever hear about his case?
Yeah, I don't know about him specifically, but again, I'm aware there's multiple instances in other sports, in the Olympic world too, and then we've actually had one in the UFC. So Grant Dawson, who was a winner on the Contender Series, Dana gave a contract to. His first test under USADA program was positive for low-level M3 metabolites. What's required for new fighters is that they disclose, going back a year, any supplements, medications, etc. that they've taken. So initially USADA made the ruling, well, this somehow showed up, you didn't disclose what caused this over the last year, and then in reconsidering over these last several months, talking to experts, other professional sports leagues, they said they couldn't rule out that whatever caused that happened more than a year ago. And so Grant was basically, deemed eligible right away, and there was ultimately no sanction there.
Jeff, I think the surprise news yesterday was the other two tests. Why did we not hear about those? Why was it just yesterday, that we finally heard that he had two other atypical findings?
Yeah, well, again, when you have an atypical finding like that, the typical course of action is USADA evaluates it, they investigate it, and this wasn't an easy investigation. They took together experts from all around the world, is my understanding, talked to other professional sports leagues. And so, when you have an atypical finding, until that's, resolved, it's not typically disclosed. There was no commission under which the jurisdiction fell. These were tests from several months ago, so Nevada considers, I think, 45 to 60 days out to be their jurisdiction. But nevertheless, out of an abundance of caution, USADA did notify Nevada in early December of this issue. So very early December, they got a letter saying, look, you have these two very low-level atypical findings in August, September, followed by 4 negatives. We just want to put this on your radar. We have one more outstanding test, which we'll turn around and expedite as fast as we can and get to you. But just so you know, this is an issue. Thus far, we have deemed this not to be a subsequent violation, and the experts are telling USADA that this is residual from the time before. There's no evidence of any further re-administration.
Do you feel, because I think everybody's biggest thing is transparency, right? And I know it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Like, you don't want people guilty before being innocent, but it just feels weird, when we're December and we're days out from a fight and we're just now hearing about months-old tests. Do you feel that there's a better way to handle this, that there's a way to be more transparent?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a slippery slope, and as you all know, our original policy was we announced potential violations, and I'll be the first to admit that was the wrong call. You had instances of potential violations, and then that narrative is set and stays with that athlete forever. And despite the fact that down the line it's determined to be non-intentional contaminated supplement. So it is, I mean, it's a slippery slope, and it's a balancing act between as much transparency but also fairness and due process to the athlete. So I'm confident that USADA handled it the right time this time through.
And what about consistency in application? The only other thing I hear the real big complaint is that other people have tested for the same substance in similar levels and they've gotten different amounts. You've heard Frank Mir come out and talk about it. We've heard Tom Lawler talk about it. How do you address that? There seems to be no real consistency. Simple. Of like, this is what you get.
It's very consistent. Jon was sanctioned the first time it showed up in his system, sanctioned for 15 months for what, McLaren ultimately determined was non-intentional use. So those out there that's saying that Jon got off scot-free, I mean, an independent arbitrator determined that he didn't do anything on purpose. It was, however it got into his system, he still got 15 months. Frank Mir, this wasn't the second occasion where there were still remnants from the first time. He was sanctioned via strict liability. Same with Tom Lawler. Now, Frank Mir, at least what they had in common, it was the same substance, but Tom Lawler's was a completely different substance, ostrine. We're not talking about long-term metabolites that stick around. We're talking about the parent compound, you know, a SARM, which is anabolic steroid-like. So apples and oranges. So those that are comparing these cases, there's no case that's truly like Jon's, where he's already been sanctioned, and then it reappeared, and the experts determined it was still from the same sanction. It's classic double jeopardy clause. You don't punish someone twice for the same, you know, action.
But the opinion that it is double jeopardy, I mean, how can that be said? There's no like scientific papers that have been written to say that this thing can actually last 17 or 18 months.
Correct, but you know, you have to look at this compound, and again, these are what I'm relying on the experts that USADA accumulated. I'm not a scientist. I'm a
but if
finance
the experts don't have those
background.
papers, don't you need to consider that?
Well, that's a question that you need to ask USADA. I mean, they're the ones that I've had some very absolute statements from 3 of the top anti-doping experts I consider in the world, that all of them said there is no evidence of re-ingestion. And there is also, maybe most importantly, no evidence that he would retain any performance-enhancing benefit tomorrow night. And so, I mean, I've got to rely on those, and I'm confident in those scientists and their opinion.
Aren't those experts all linked to USADA, though?
No, not necessarily. Smurtle, Dr. Daniel Eichner is one of them. He runs the Salt Lake City testing laboratory. Now, USADA uses his laboratory to conduct tests, but he's not a USADA employee. All he sees when it comes into the laboratory is numbers. It could be an NFL test, a Major League Baseball test, an Olympic test, a UFC test, and as he's analyzing these numbers, he didn't know who it belonged to. So I'm very confident in Dr. Eichner's ability and expertise.
What are the other experts?
Dr. Larry Bowers. Dr. Bowers was formerly ran the United States or International Olympic Committee testing laboratory at Indiana University. He then went on to become the chief science officer at USADA, is now retired. He no longer works for USADA. He's an independent consultant. And then the last one is Dr. Matthew Fedorik. He's USADA's current science director.
What do they say to you? How do they know definitively that this is not a new ingestion? What is the sign? Because I saw what Eichner wrote. He said most likely. Right?
So, you know, I think, and again, I would encourage all of you to reach out to USADA and talk to these experts, but I think it's primarily based on the paper that came out in 2012 by the Russian doctor, and he basically did some studies, my understanding, on himself. He was actually ingesting oral turinabol himself and submitting urine samples and testing them, and he identified up to 50 different metabolites from this. And if you read the paper, there is a certain, and he calls it a midterm metabolite, which he definitively said, look, this metabolite's available 22 days in the body or in the urine after ingestion. Jon's, you know, had several positive tests that were within that 22-day window that never showed those shorter midterm metabolites. So only the long-term metabolite would show. So the theory is that if it was re-ingestion or recent ingestion, you're A, going to either see the parent compound, B, going to see the short-term metabolite, or C, going to see this documented 22-day lasting long midterm metabolite, and those were never found. Only this long-term metabolite was found, and that's consistent, as I said earlier, with these other cases in other sports, in the Olympic sports. They're seeing this commonly occur now.
Given your role, you guys were first notified about this particular test on December 20th. Is that accurate?
I think that sounds right. The days are kind of run together over this last week.
Is it fair that Alexander Gustafsson finds out through the media about this? Why is he the last to know? Shouldn't he have found out when you guys found out? So
we wanted to resolve this issue and not, you know, part of I think our decision making here was to cause as little stress as possible on the athletes on the card. So we wanted to make sure that we had things resolved in terms of where this fight was going to occur, where it was going to occur. And so, you know, as soon as that decision was made, every effort was, you know, made to contact Gus immediately. He happened to be on a helicopter ride in the Grand Canyon. As soon as he landed, he came directly to the office. So, I mean, I think it was the right call in order to work things out before, you know, we burdened him with this. And look, there's no doubt about it. I mean, this is a stressful thing for, I think, everybody. When I get the call from USADA in normal course of events, they'll call me They'll tell me about the athlete. The first thing I ask is, what's the drug? What's the level? And I have this tidal wave of thoughts that go through my mind. How is this going to play out? And literally, I sit at my desk maybe for 5 minutes or so, hand in my, head in my hand, like, okay, here's how this is going to go. And I, all these things that you guys are asking and talking about and stress on the athlete, I saw this coming with this one. This isn't, optically not a pretty picture again, but I stand up here 100% confident, and you saw it as decision making and these experts that they have, and I believe this is the right thing to do, this fight going on tomorrow.